As humans, we seem to have an innate sense of dissatisfaction. Once upon a time, this might have served as well from an evolutionary point of view. Aiming to be stronger, fitter, faster might have helped us evade the attacks of saber-toothed tigers and avoid getting trampled on by woolly mammoths. Aiming to have a bigger, brighter cave might have made us more attractive to a mate, therefore ensuring the continuation of our genes for future generations. But where does it leave us now? You could say that this sense of dissatisfaction with who we are, where we are and what we've got is fueling this capitalist world that we live in, this striving for more material goods and status symbols. So our sense of worth and success seems to be attached with the size of our house, the number of noughts on our bank balance, and the things we've got, the holidays we go on, and the clothes we wear. But is that really what success is? Or is success about finding contentment, finding happiness? And how do we even gauge that? There's that question of, are we nearly there yet? Which begs another question, where is there? And how do we know when we've got there? These are kind of existential questions that a lot of us have to face when we're choosing our careers and making our way through life. If we're not striving for more, striving for better, are we less worthy than those who are attaining the great heights of success that we're all supposed to aspire to? Or is it enough to be content with what we've got, where we are, and who we are right now? This is a conversation I had with the journalist and author Oliver Burkeman, who argues that you don't need to earn your place to take up space on this planet. It was automatically granted to you when you were born. Oliver is the author of The Antidote, Happiness for People Who Can't Stand Positive Thinking, and Help, How to Become Slightly Happier and Get a Bit More Done. Later this year, 4,000 Weeks, his forthcoming book, will be published, and he talks a lot about this whole idea of why we're here and how we can get the most out of life without necessarily punishing ourselves to be constantly striving for better, more, bigger, shinier and more expensive. If you want to find out more about Oliver Burkeman and sign up to his excellent newsletter, you can find him at www.oliverburkeman, that's BURKEMAN.com, www.oliverburkeman.com. And I hope you enjoy this conversation where we dig into some of those questions about, are we nearly there yet? And how do we even know what that looks like when we get there? All right, I hope you enjoy this, and I'll speak to you again at the end. So Oliver, thank you for sparing the time to chat with me. You have written, well, it's 2 books now, isn't it? You've got The Antidote, The Happiness for People Who Can't Stand Positive Thinking, Help, How to Become Slightly Happier and Get a Bit More Done. And then your 3rd book, 4,000 Weeks. And I guess that's a reference to you only get so much time in life, so better make the most out of it.
Yes, right. I mean, I think the joke there, if there is a joke, is that there's, it makes it sound like it's just saying who specifically it's for, but that refers to everybody. I think the feeling in the UK was that the phrase time management sounds too much like a business book, or in a way that is not sort of an accurate reflection of what's inside. To me, that's kind of the joke of that phrase, but I also appreciate, like I want to reach the right.
Well, you got to make a living as well, haven't you? So you don't want to
exactly.
lose half your audience there. But
right.
But this is kind of what you've been writing about the whole time in your Guardian column and all this kind of stuff. It's about one of your things is build a meaningful life in the age of bewilderment, and it's that kind of notion of how do we get something meaningful from our time, our short time on this earth, without kind of punishing ourselves too much, without kind of losing the point of why we're here. But at the same time, you talk about how we're all completely insignificant in the grand scheme of things. So why try too hard to put a dent in the universe? So how do we get that balance right? How do we kind of find our purpose, yet at the same time hold on to our kind of insignificance, if you like?
I'm interested that you talk about it as a balance, because I think it's kind of the same point in a way. I think one way of talking about the sort of, if there is a sort of consistent theme through what I've been thinking about and writing about for a while now, is the sort of the very empowering benefits of seeing reality as it is and facing reality as it is. Now, I think this actually applies in a huge number of domains, but in the one that is relating to sort of time and time management, this is about saying, if you understand your limitations, the limited amount of time you get on the planet, the limited amount of time in a day, the limited amount you can do, your limited capacity to change the world, that isn't a sort of counsel of resignation where you see the truth of it and you feel very depressed and just stay at home watching Netflix. That's like the first step to really doing whatever is the most meaningful of activities that are open to you. That is the way to make the best decisions about what to prioritize in your limited time and your limited life, and to sort of really get the most out of having got to be a human being here. And my sort of hopefully good humored rant against a lot of conventional advice on time management and productivity is that the end result of it is that it just sort of enables this illusion that with the right system and then enough self-discipline, you can sort of get everything done. You don't have to make tough choices. You get to sort of be, in a way, I mean, if you want to get sort of very sort of metaphysical about it, it's almost encouraging our delusions of that we can be sort of godlike in relation to reality, instead of like deeply limited and mortal. And it might feel good for an hour or two to think that you're implementing a new sort of system of time management that's going to mean that you excel to the maximum in every single role that you could possibly imagine. But it doesn't work. And the end result, I think, is that people just get busier and feel like their goals are even more slipping away over the horizon than they otherwise would be. So I think that sort of facing reality, including our insignificance as individual humans in the span of planetary time or whatever, and finding a meaningful life, are completely two sides of the same coin, really. Yeah.
I mean, do you think that like we kind of set ourselves these impossible goals? There seems to be a lot of success porn and achievement porn on especially Twitter and social media. If you're into that, there's a lot of get the right habits, the morning routines of successful people, all of this kind of stuff. And if you're not getting up at 5 a.m. to work on your side hustle, you're a complete failure at life. Do you think we actually need someone to say to us, actually, it's all right, it's okay to just be, not to be a super achiever. It's okay just to live and to get kind of some sort of joy from small things and from day to day, mundanities, if you like.
I think that's totally right. I mean, I feel a bit conflicted about this because, as it might not surprise you to hear, I'm like a total sucker and always have been for all that kind of stuff. This is for sort of, the perfect morning routine, for how to sort of cram a whole extra kind of dimension to your life in through the clever management of your to-do list or whatever. So if there's any wisdom in the stuff I'm writing about at the moment and the book I've got coming out, it's sort of the wisdom of someone who's like been all the way through that and found the limits of it, as opposed to somebody who's just sort of implacably opposed to it. So yeah, I think, there's a very strong role for remembering that, you don't need to earn your place on the planet. The culture and the economy makes us need to earn our place in all sorts of ways, financially and otherwise. But the sort of that at that deepest existential level, you don't want to connect your sort of right to exist to any particular degree of accomplishment. And also, I think that's how you then will go on to accomplish more, if you're freed from that burden that you have to do it just to sort of justify your existence. I think the kind of ultimate ideal endpoint here would be not to reject all that stuff about side hustles and perfect morning routines utterly, but to be able to sort of see the very limited role it can play. It's fine if people are inspired by that. I think you sometimes get a sort of pushback that goes too far and says, because we shouldn't live in a socioeconomic system that requires some people to have side hustles just to pay the rent. Therefore, if you are excited by the idea of launching a business in your spare time, that's somehow bad. I don't think it is bad. I think it's just a question of seeing this stuff in the right context, understanding that, no productivity technique is going to be the final answer to the problem you may have about, feeling a lack of self-worth, or the problem you may have of thinking that you've always got to meet everybody else's demands, or whatever your particular hang-up is from, all the different ways in which even the best parents screw us up in one way or another. I don't think that becoming more efficient with your time in one way or another is ever going to be the way that people make it through that. That doesn't mean you shouldn't have a cool morning routine if it's kind of a fun thing for you to do. And
this is it.
5 a.m. is straightforward.
You reminded me of something then, and I'm just looking for it now. And it's a quote, and I'm just because there does seem to be this thing that we outsource our kind of direction in life to all these other institutions and people who've gone before us, and all these people who say, this is, if you're going to be successful, you need to get these grades, and you need to do this, and you need to be earning 7 figures, and you need to be doing that. But Ray Bradbury said, the whole secret is to do things that excite you. And I guess that's one way of finding success in life. It's not about the size of your bank balance, but it's about engaging with those things. If you have got an amazing routine, don't become a kind of slave to it. Become the owner of it, and just do the things that float your boat, I guess. You're a writer, and that's something that clearly is for you, but you're not writing about finance, for example. You're right. Choosing the things that kind of interest you. And in the Antidote, you talk about happiness is maybe not what we should be striving for here. Is kind of happiness a bit of a kind of red herring, and actually we need to be searching for things that engage us and excite us and interest us, do you think?
I think that's right. I think happiness is problematic on a number of levels, because it's very hard to define, because we're sort of notoriously bad at predicting what will make us happy. It's a sort of a placeholder term for what people want out of life, but if you look too closely at what the word connotes, I feel like it's a lot of things that people don't really want out of life. If you get into a deep conversation with someone, they will very rarely tell you that they really would like to, get through their lives without feeling the many negative feelings that come from really engaging with life, right? Grief and sadness, and even anxiety in certain ways, I feel like is a kind of, it's an expression of kind of committing to living in reality, that these things come up. So then I tend to talk about a meaningful life, and that is that I think you can make the same criticism that that's just a placeholder word for something that is very hard to express in clearer terms. But I think that, for me anyway, that sort of gets at something instinctive about, or intuitive about, there are all sorts of things in anyone's life that they're glad they did, even though they probably weren't feeling really thrilled and cheery in the moment of doing it, or sort of emotional capacities that they wouldn't want to shut off, So I've got a 4-year-old son, and as every parent for time immemorial has said, parenthood involves this strange thing of kind of having a part of the thing you care about more deeply than anything else kind of out in the world, like with someone else right now. It's kind of very unnerving whenever you stop to think about it, but you sort of wouldn't want to be the kind of person who had no access to that kind of anxiety, I feel like.
It's funny, because I have a 2-year-old, and I always say to people, and she was born prematurely, and we had sort of difficulties all along the way, and she's absolutely fine now. But people say to me, is it amazing having a child? Right. And I say, it's the best thing in the world, but I wouldn't want to wish it on anyone else. It's
right.
And I guess
Yeah.
that's like you've said. Obviously, I get your kind of bi-month or your twice monthly email newsletter, and you've spoken in the past about, the way to kind of grow and get more value from life is to do the things that are actually a bit uncomfortable and a bit, we have this tendency to run away from suffering. But actually, the way to really get value from it is to engage with it and go through it. I think, engage with those difficult emotions, do the hard things that ultimately will bring us reward. And it's that kind of, like you said, engaging with the anxiety and the fear and all the different things, because you can live a happy life. I guess you can put yourself in a nice bubble and never kind of experience life, but ultimately that's really boring.
I think boring at best. And actually what happens is that a different kind of mental suffering arises in that context, and does for all of us, to the extent that we try to avoid suffering, which everyone does to some extent, right? There's a great quote from Jung. He says, neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering. And the word neurosis in this context is kind of a little old-fashioned now, but there's a distinction being drawn there between the kind of discomfort that sort of comes with doing what matters and stepping into life fully and to your personal power fully, to get a bit sort of new agey about it. And then there's another kind which comes from avoiding all that stuff. And I mean, I think all of us are avoiding all that stuff to some degree all the time. I assume the sort of perfectly psychologically healthy person doesn't exist. But, that's the kind of suffering that feels somehow unnecessary or meaningless, or it doesn't take you closer towards a sense of sort of authentic life, and you sort of regret the fact that you spent how many years feeling that kind of suffering. Then the other kind, it's hard to put words on, but the other kind is the kind that, like, it often sucks, but you do ultimately know deep down that, like, that was a part of showing up for life.
Yeah, I mean, because you've talked about kind of some of the most important things we need to do are the things we don't want to do. And I mean, that can be day to day, having the conversations we don't want to have, or it could be, it could be something as straightforward as going for a run when it's cold outside or something like that.
Tell me about it. Yes.
Yeah. And I mean, it's probably pretty cold where you are right now, I should think. But
yeah.
Has the snow gone yet from?
Yes, actually, I was hesitating because today literally is actually surprisingly warm, but we're in a cold part of the year for sure. Yeah.
I mean, I struggle to go jogging even on the warmest days, to be honest. But yeah, I mean, there is that sense that, we can choose the easy option and, go away from the things that are difficult and choose the things that are, you've talked about going the counterintuitive way and really seeking out the difficult things. Like the Stoics would say, the obstacle is the way,
right.
in a way, really engage with that thing, which actually looks quite painful.
Yeah, I think. Sorry, I didn't want to.
No, I'm just.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. I think this comes up in so many different places. The obstacle is the way in Stoicism. There are Jungians who talk about the idea that the problem is the solution. I mean, one way of putting it, which I wrote about in one of those emails, is just that, like, if you want to change in some way, and hopefully, I think most of us want to change in some way most of the time. I feel like that's a sign of life in some sense. It's going to be counter to your instincts, because, like, every instinct that you've developed in your life has been for the maintenance and flourishing of the kind of person that you are right now. So if this makes sense, a change you're going to want to make to that is going to feel painful. This rather overused and self-help analogy of weightlifting is actually very useful. There's a reason it's overused. I mean, if you want lifting a dumbbell to have an effect in strengthening your muscles, it has to be on the edge of what you can handle. It has to feel at least somewhat uncomfortable. That's the whole point. That's the change that you're seeking to make. I don't think this is a recipe for sort of going through your whole life looking for the most difficult challenges. That can be its own kind of weird psychology, probably. But certainly this idea that like something matters to you, and you know at a sort of deep gut level that it's something you want to be doing in your life. Like, it's really helpful if you can drop or at least loosen the expectation that it's going to feel great every minute that you're doing it, because that will really sort of send you off in the wrong direction.
I mean, I suppose there's a kind of sense that you have to engage in those difficult things, but I mean, there has to come a point where you kind of say, maybe this is too difficult an experience to deal with. I know a lot of the great thinkers have kind of gone through a personal crisis before they've come out and flourished as, this leader or whatever. I know certainly in Buddhism, a lot of the great Buddhist, modern Buddhist speakers like Jack Kornfield or people like that have all come from sort of trauma, if you like. And it's a question I sort of often ask people, do you have to go through this crisis before you can really find out who you are? Or do you think you can just find out who you are by getting there bit by bit, slowly by, step by step? Do we need to be beaten down and crushed before we can rise like a phoenix again?
It's really interesting. I do think about this, and there's a part of the book where I try to, the new book where I try to talk about what it is that people learn from very close encounters with mortality, of a kind that, at this point in my life, I can't really say that I have had it firsthand. I think in a way, one argument is like, why are we asking this question? Because nobody is going to voluntarily precipitate that kind of agony in their lives. So even if it is true on some level that we, quote, need to experience it, though, if you're not experiencing it at the moment, or you never have, then sort of case closed in a way. But I also do think there's some wisdom in that old line. I don't know where it comes from particularly, a sort of self-helpy line that the worst thing that's ever happened to you is the worst thing that's ever happened to you. Meaning, I take it that, on some level, just life brings us up against our edge all the time. And so, I think probably all of us, certainly me, have kind of things we struggle with in life that feel from the inside like kind of big life or death dramas, and I think are the opportunity, if you come at them right, to grow and to develop some of these qualities that we admire in such a greater level in sort of spiritual teachers and great philosophers and thinkers of the past. You have that opportunity because it does feel like kind of a big deal to live one's own life from the inside. Now, if I actually started talking about those issues, I don't mind talking about them, but I guarantee they would seem like weirdly small beer to every other person. But I bet almost everyone listening would be able to slot in analogy, the thing that serves that function for them.
I mean, do you think life itself is a kind of ongoing trauma that we just have to kind of battle our way through and try and come out as unscathed as possible at the other end?
I think that's a nice way of thinking about it to some extent. I mean, on some level, our concepts of trauma exist precisely to sort of demarcate certain extremes, right? So if we're all doing it, maybe it can't be trauma in one sense. But there's a long sort of psychoanalytic tradition, especially, of thinking about birth and being parented as a kind of the infliction of a wound, even if your parents are, the loveliest and most earnestly sort of loving people you could imagine. There's something about going from the sort of perfect situation of not even having been born to the kind of situation of getting all your needs, in the ideal case anyway, taken care of by someone else, and gradually having to sort of stand on your own 2 feet and earn a damn wage and everything. Like, I can see that. I just reviewed. Sorry, yeah.
I was going to say, we come into the world crying, don't we? So it can't be that.
Right, exactly. That sort of howl of rage that this should. But we didn't ask for it, and I think that's a long tradition in philosophy and existentialism. And
I think Bob Dylan said, we nobody chose to be here. It was forced upon us.
Right.
So we just got to make the most of it until we can get back to wherever we came from.
Right.
Bob Dylan or someone like that.
I think it's so I think it's interesting to. I don't want to. You're always on thin ice, suggesting that all of us have the same sort of traumatic experiences, though that portion of society that actually has had specific and unique traumatic experiences. But I think it's a useful frame for thinking about all this, because it's sort of, one thing it does for me is it instantly lifts from my shoulders the burden of thinking that I'm supposed to be finding all of this completely easy and never encountering any difficulties. It's like, no, what a ridiculous situation to be born into as a sort of conscious human being, limited in time and abilities on the earth in this period of history.
I spent most of my life thinking I'm doing it wrong and I'm such a failure, and I look at other people who've got the nice cars and, think they've got it right. They know exactly what they're doing. Where am I going wrong? What do they know that I don't know? Mm-hmm. And then you speak to them and they've got an alcohol problem, or they've got divorce behind them, or they've got, some kind of thing where, okay, they might be doing all right in this area, but they're struggling elsewhere, or, everyone finds this hard, and we're just trying to everyone is trying to make the most of it one way or another.
Right. And I think totally. And I think that illusion that you could do it perfectly is really, it's totally fundamental to what I'm trying to get across in this book. It's such a sort of, it feels so important to me in my own life, just this idea that there may be certain things you could do better. I assume there are certain things all of us could do better at any given moment. But some aspect of the situation that you find yourself in is like a structural consequence of being human, and therefore it's kind of off your shoulders to find a solution to it. There's a quote from the Buddhist teacher Charlotte Jocko Beck that I've got at the beginning of at the front of this forthcoming book, which has become a sort of a motto for life for me at the moment, which is what makes it unbearable is your mistaken belief that it can be cured. Which is kind of fantastically bleak, but also to me sort of uplifting, because there are a lot of problems.
Off the hook.
There are a lot of problems. You're not going to get away from them. The one thing you can let go of is the notion that it ought to be fundamentally otherwise. That's just extra pressure.
Because I guess that comes to that notion you were talking about in one of your newsletters, this whole idea of, are we there yet? And I know in therapy and in certain kind of personal development spheres, there's this question, what do you want and how will you know when you're there? And then what? Mm-hmm. And there's this argument of maybe we should just be enjoying what we're doing right now and kind of just be grateful for where we are right now. Because if we get to a point where we kind of say, this is it, we've achieved everything we need to achieve, then what happens? Do we stagnate? Maybe happiness is in the process, in the kind of journey forward.
I think it completely is, and I think that there's something so wise in that observation. I think personally, I have sort of there's a chapter in my last book, The Antidote, about the trouble of sort of attaching too much to goals and to your future targets. And I stand by that, but I think that I have I've got a slightly, I hope, more sophisticated sense of this stuff since then. What I am against is the idea that life will become truly real or truly problem-free or truly plain sailing at some point in the future when a set of things are achieved. And that's where kind of be here now, focus on the moment, value the process is so important. But I do think that we can think about small, measurable goals that you do know when you've attained them, as part of this process and this journey, right? So I don't think it's just a question of becoming a sort of perfectly enlightened Zen monk and not caring what tomorrow may bring. I think the important distinction is between one day my life is going to be perfect and flawless, and I'm not going to allow myself to be fully present until I get to that point, versus like, yeah, right now I'm working on this, whatever it might be, short story. My criterion for having reached the first level of completion for it is that I've got to the end, and that it's more than 3,000 words long or whatever, some kind of measurable thing. My criterion for the next stage of it will be that I've edited it and shown it to 2 people and got their responses, or I don't write short stories, so I'm imagining what this process is, but those are goals, and they are sort of goals that belong in the flow of life, and you are not putting onto them the expectation that they're going to transform your life, but they are actually changes in the status quo from now to how it will be different in a week's time. And I think I wouldn't want people to take away from the Antidote, and I don't think they will take away from my forthcoming book, the idea that kind of sort of focused progress in the things that you really care about is somehow a problem. I think that it's expecting something sort of ultimate and existential from that kind of goal setting that's the problem.
Yeah, because I was always brought up to kind of, work hard, keep your head down, and life will give you everything you need. And so I worked hard, I kept my head down, and never got a promotion, never got, a pay rise, never got any Christmas bonuses or anything like that. And I'm thinking, how on earth did this happen? And then essentially I ended up becoming kind of a passive observer with no control over my own life, as opposed to someone now who's taking a bit more ownership of that. And I suppose setting small goals like this helps you do that. You can say, I want to run a marathon ultimately. So today I want to run around the park, and then maybe next week I'll run twice around the park or something like that, and just take action and planned action. Do you think life needs to be a project in a way, or do you think it's just, where do we draw the line between kind of giving ourselves jobs to do and just stopping to smell the roses and enjoy ourselves?
Yeah, it's a really deep question, and it probably takes me to sort of the very edge of my own development on this stuff, because I suspect that I approach more of life like a project than one might ideally. I think it relates to what I was just saying, right? I think it's totally fine to have these kind of goals, even in your leisure, even in your relationships to some extent, just so long as they are not this kind of ultimate goal that has the effect of making the present, the devaluing the present. I talk in a section of the forthcoming book about the sort of radicalism of the idea of having a hobby, not a side hustle, but just like something that you do that you're not seeking to attain outcomes with, other than the doing of it. And I think that's an important part of this. Yeah, I mean, again, it's just that, I think I do have certain goals and projects in my life, even outside work, that are kind of it as ever. And this is a sort of Buddhist insight, but it's the way in which you sort of attach or over attach to them that is the problem, not the thing itself. That it's okay to want to get better at the musical instrument you're learning or something. That's it's just not sort of postponing life until the point at which you're a virtuoso, I guess.
Yeah, and I guess it's kind of taking enjoyment from that process of learning and getting better and practicing and seeing what works. I often kind of refer to life as being a bit like a koan. You're not here to find the answer, but you're here to kind of explore the question and go out and try different things and dip a toe in the water here and try something else over there. And if you like that, go and do a bit more of that. And if you don't like it, go and try something else. Just try not to go bankrupt in the process, or
Yes, no, I think it's great advice. I think we all do need some way of kind of getting purchase on life, or getting traction, or whatever the right word would be. It is pretty it may be possible for some people to just be sort of purely, utterly present to the moment. But in some ways, having these kinds of goals or launching these kinds of experiments with ourselves they're a kind of a handrail to that, right? For the rest of us who haven't achieved perfect transcendent spiritual enlightenment, to sort of be present. And if the way you can lose yourself in playing a piece of piano music is to be trying to work towards a particular skill, a sort of skill level at the piano through lessons or exams or whatever, I think that's totally fine.
Do you think there's a danger that modern kind of material society, with its advertising and its nice shiny things and all of this kind of stuff, is taking away a little bit of our ownership over our own lives? And it's saying, if you earn this much money, you will be able to afford this nice car or this nice holiday. And so we suddenly start outsourcing everything. And then before you know it, we've suddenly got no kind of purchase, as you said, over what we're doing. We're just waiting for our next pay rise or waiting for our next bonus. And we've lost sense of who we are and what makes us kind of feel part of life, or at least, owning our own life.
Yeah. No, I think that's exactly right. I think that this whole sort of this kind of abstract thing I've been talking about in this conversation about the sort of illusion of godlike infinitude, or whatever the word would be, versus coming back down to earth with a bump and seeing what you really are. The illusory side of that is completely sort of exacerbated by consumer capitalism, because that's its job, right? To sort of not to satisfy, but to hold out the promise of future satisfaction.
The carrot on the stick, isn't it?
Right.
Forever out of reach. Yeah.
Right. And I think it was Alan Watts, the great, spiritual writer, who made this point, although it's probably been made by others, that what we call materialism, when we complain about living in a materialistic society, is kind of like, it's the exact opposite of what we actually live in. We live in this society that invests products with the power to do things far beyond their material goods, their material sort of reality. It urges us to accumulate as much money as we can, which is kind of the least material thing in the world, kind of purely immaterial measure of success or of potential to change your life in whatever way you might want. And that actually a truly materialist approach to life would be one that really was in the weeds of where you actually were, that was looking for meaning in the products that you actually own already, that saw the benefit of a new acquisition in what it could actually do rather than in what it made you feel about yourself. So I think there's a lot in that, and it's definitely all about this kind of wanting symbolically to be bigger and more sort of immortal creatures than we ever could be. Yeah.
Because I like to think that I'm a kind of spiritual guy, and I'm not interested in all the kind of materialism and the shiny objects. But for a while, I had a Land Rover, and I wanted a Land Rover for ages, and I finally got this Land Rover, and it actually made me feel pretty good about myself. This thing, it was a horrible polluting, big engine thing that I used to drive around in. Probably looked quite ridiculous climbing out of this thing, but it actually made me feel like I'd achieved something and I'd arrived, and a little part of the spiritual emptiness inside me had been filled by this
as long as you had a large country estate to be driving it around, that seems like the
that
crucial
was another
thing.
thing that made me very unhappy about my life. I didn't quite have that, the full picture and the barber jacket and all that kind of stuff as well. But
It's interesting though. I mean, like, you also don't want to begrudge people the certain things that I think often those effects are very short-lived. I don't know if that was true of your. How long did the Land Rover make you feel good for?
Well, it destroyed itself after a year. The engine went on it, so I never quite found the answer to that question. So,
but so like there's this phenomenon of hedonic adaptation that you move to a new house that's way better than your last one, and then a month or two in, it's just where you live. It's not something you notice or gain pleasure from. On the other hand, I think it's useful to kind of isolate in your own life what the few things are that seem to resist that effect. There was a lovely Twitter thread I was following the other day about things that people have bought during the pandemic that they actually do think had ended up making them happier, as opposed to all the things that wouldn't or that don't. So I think that the sort of really nice coffee mug that I bought, that I have my morning coffee out of, really is something that delivers pleasure to me. Some really good, although most people hate them, I think, buckwheat pillows.
Oh, right.
Sleep on, that are kind of like sleeping on a concrete block. Again, I think that's I'm happy every evening when my head falls onto one of those. And there's like weird social psychology research that suggests that cosmetic surgery, when it's a success, doesn't stop. Like, people are happy to have. It's such a sort of cliched thing. It seems so sort of superficial, and the sort of height of the materialist consumer capitalism or whatever, but it seems to be that when people have like facelifts and stuff, they remain happy about it for many years. So I don't particularly want to be the person who says don't do that if it has that.
Well, I'm going to have to investigate that. I think, see what I can what I can remove or augment in some way. But I mean, do you think that we are just born dissatisfied? Do you think that's what the problem of all of this is? We are just dissatisfied creatures, and we feel like life is about seeking satisfaction and correcting that problem? Or do you think that's something that we learn maybe as we grow up?
I don't know. I'm definitely partial to the argument that, to a sort of evolutionary argument for this. This is made very well in a book called Why Buddhism is True by Robert Wright, who's a sort of Buddhist in an extremely secular sense, and also not in the sense of claiming any great sort of meditative attainments. He's kind of feels like very much like me, been to a couple of meditation retreats and tries to do it fairly frequently or whatever. But he is an expert also in writing about sort of evolution and evolutionary psychology. And he makes this point that certainly strikes me as very plausible, that a certain kind of dissatisfaction is highly adaptive. If the goal is to get your sort of genes into the next generation and not to be eaten by a saber-toothed tiger before you can do so, then you wouldn't want to be sort of someone who didn't stop looking for more opportunities to eat or reproduce, or explore the next frontier, and you wouldn't want to be undistractable. I think that's a really interesting side of this too, right? You wouldn't want it to be the case that you could just choose to place your attention on what you were looking at and not hear the predator creeping up in the bushes behind you. There's all sorts of ways in which sort of keeping us not quite satisfied is in the interests of the interests in quotation marks, I guess, of evolution, of natural selection. So in a way, the way that Robert Wright presents this, you can sort of think of Buddhism, but I think a lot of other wise spiritual and psychological approaches as well, as a sort of intervention against the interests of evolution. If we take it as a given that we don't have to just try and follow our adaptive drives, then you are looking for a way to sort of reconcile yourself to that situation, to take the edge off that dissatisfaction. I think he would also say that the Buddhist tradition also gets at certain things that are sort of truer about reality than our evolutionary biases want us to realize, right? So there are sort of evolutionary reasons for all our cognitive biases that you can see as why they are adaptive, but they're actually not, they don't give you a sort of accurate picture of reality. So if you're interested in sort of knowing how things really are, there's some sort of personal work to be done there as well. That's it.
I mean, I went and was listening to a Dharma talk the other day about going through the different stages of meditation and the work involved in kind of trying to see things as clear as they really are. And it is a lot of hard work, which makes me think maybe we're not supposed to see how things really are at all. And, maybe we are supposed to be biased, and, maybe the consumerism and this kind of constant dissatisfaction is the natural order of things. Maybe we're supposed to be yearning for holidays and cars. Maybe that's just how we're supposed to have evolved.
Right. I mean, I think, it all makes sense. And in a way, what I conclude from thinking about the relationship between sort of evolution and the quest for meaning is that in a way, the fact that we even have the capacity to wonder about the meaning of it all, or to seek a meaningful life rather than a sort of the immediate satisfaction of appetites and things, that's almost like an epiphenomenon. It's almost like a thing that came along with the ride. It's not central to evolution's goals for us that we have these, but we're saddled with them, and for at least some of us, those kind of gnawing questions don't go away. So I think on some level, a lot of personal development of the best kind is a kind of resistance to some of those natural imperatives. I mean, which is a funny way of thinking about it, but I think it might be true. Yeah.
I mean, do you think there's all this personal development, the books you're writing, the books, this whole kind of personal development Twitter, which you've even said is kind of a little bit right wing and a little bit too macho. Do you think it's a kind of therapy that we're going through to try and kind of make ourselves feel a bit more comfortable with this dissatisfaction and this kind of cumulative trauma that we seem to be lumbered with, whatever happens one way or another?
Yeah, I don't know if this is what you're getting at, but what it makes me think of, so cut me off if it's not the thing, is the degree to which advice giving is a form of a sort of therapeutic role to play. So like when I think about personal development Twitter, some of it is, as you say, pretty obnoxious, but some of it isn't. Some of it's very useful. But the other thing I think is useful to the people emitting it. And so I think that's absolutely true of my own writing, if it counts as advice writing. My hope is that if I bring something relatively unusual to that, it's just a certain amount of honesty about the fact that it is also the journey that I'm on, and that thinking these things through in these forms is partly, just sort of self-therapy. I don't think that's a problem, actually. I think as long as it's sort of honestly approached, that is kind of that's the right way to sort of, for us all to make this journey together, right? I mean, it's not that there are some people who have, well, there may be, but I don't think it's mainly that there are some people who have the secret and everyone else who is following them. It is just that different people have different things to contribute, and to toot my own horn, maybe it's that I can put some of it into words better than average. But that doesn't mean that I've got any further along the sort of the path than someone whose contribution is not to write about it. So I'm getting feedback to that. I get emails in reply to that email newsletter all the time that are very plainly, just as wise as anything, if not much wiser than I wrote, or that make me think about an angle that I hadn't thought about before. And it feels collaborative in that way. So I think there is a kind of a real role for kind of a group of, I don't know what the right word would be. It's more, it has more in common with a friendship relation, even though it isn't literally an intimate friendship most of the time, than a sort of teacher-student relation. And I know a bunch of people who sort of are meditation teachers and things who like to say this about their own work, right? That they're sort of like, there's someone who sort of might have something to contribute as a companion on this strange journey rather than the person who holds all the secrets.
Do you think you need a kind of sense of self-awareness, a kind of honest and slightly objective view of yourself, as objective as you can be, in order to embark on this journey? Or do you think actually being a bit perhaps arrogant, or I don't know, I mean, there's a lot of, especially in finance Twitter, if you like, there's a lot of kind of, if you're not doing this, you're doing it wrong. And that kind of aggressive tone is slightly kind of, it feels like I'm being bullied into buying Bitcoin or something.
I had a bit of a sudden moment of insight or something about this just the other day. I was thinking, like, a lot of what I'm writing about and talking about at the moment, I feel like are insights gleaned from getting a little bit older, and in Jungian terms, which I'm kind of into, this is the period called midlife, which can be anything from like 30 to 70. If you sort of read Jung in detail, it's not about having a sort of one-off midlife crisis and buying a sports car or a Land Rover. But it is a kind of wisdom, if I can call it that comes from a sort of trying things out, and certain things working out and certain things not working out, and you become a different person. And one does sometimes think, well, could there be an age that is sort of too young to be trying to internalize these lessons? If there was a sort of 22-year-old listening to me talk about the importance of embracing your limitations, I think it's still true, and it can be sort of rephrased in a way that makes it true. But there may be some benefits early in your adulthood for thinking that you got to do things one way, and you're going to manage to become you're going to manage to transcend the ordinary human condition. I don't know. Maybe SpaceX wouldn't exist without that kind of self-delusion. I've got no idea. I mean, maybe there are, maybe there are sort of people among us who have that, and whether or not it makes them happy, it certainly does enable them to accomplish things.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, there's this there's the Confucius quote, isn't there? A man has two lives, and the second one begins when he realizes he only has one.
Yes,
and I wonder if that point of realization, when you realize, kind of, hang on a minute, I've got this far, I still don't know what the hell I'm doing. Maybe that's the thing that kind of triggers all of this thinking and this kind of, this exploration, if you like, of, oh my God, I've wasted half my life. I'd better make the most of the next half if I'm that lucky,
Yeah, I think that's one way of interpreting that great quote. By the way, I love that quote because if you look on the internet, it's roughly 50-50 whether Confucius said it or Tom Hiddleston. Well, I think is the funniest combination of names it's possible to imagine.
Well, anyway. Some people they're not sure if Confucius even existed, or whether it's just like a whole load of other,
Right. Yeah. I mean, what I said, the sort of downbeat way of interpreting that quote is that, like, real life begins when you realize that, like, you've only got a certain amount left, and you better sort of panic and get a move on. There's something else in there as well, which is, which I feel like is just a sort of sinking back into reality, a kind of, that idea that it's not a dress rehearsal is sort of scary on the superficial level, because it means You've got to get a move on if you're going to do anything.
Yeah.
But in another sense, I think there's a sort of liberating thing there, because it means that, all you can deal with is what you have in front of you, but it's also all you have to deal with. So if your particular issues are to do with a feeling that you need to do more and achieve more, or justify your existence in some way, which I think all of us who are interested in this productivity stuff probably suffer from on some level, that's a great weight off your shoulders, right? Because it's like it means that you it means that you can only hope to work with the day in front of you. In philosophy, there's this notion that ought implies can, that it makes no sense to say that someone has a moral duty to do something that is not possible for them to do. And I think there's quite a lot of therapeutic benefit in that. It's like, well, no one can expect you to be superhuman, because you are human, and it's not going to change.
No, absolutely. And it kind of brings us on to that whole idea of 4,000 weeks. It's kind of probably a good way to kind of round up the conversation. How many weeks in do you realize, hang on a minute, I'm ticking them off here and I haven't done the thing yet that's right in front of me.
Right. Yeah.
But maybe I don't even know what that thing is yet. Maybe this is all just about, finding the thing we need to investigate and, doing that investigation.
Yeah, I think it's a mode of being, isn't it? It's a way of engaging with life rather than a specific outcome to get from life. It is like that sort of living the questions, or whatever you were saying. It's that kind of way of it's a way of being that I think anyone can access at any time, even if they don't have a clear plan for what they want to be doing with their life. You do sort of want to be showing up for it in the most authentic way that you can, which is going to involve discomfort and not always loving the specific hour of work that you're doing towards a project that really matters to you, or something like that.
And as a writer, I'm sure you can relate to that quite a lot.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, no, it's if you expect it to be fun every minute, that's a problem. And the occasional famous writers who claim that, I'm very, very suspicious of, and
absolutely,
and dislike.
Yeah. And what have they got that I haven't figured out yet? What are they doing that
Right. It's just strange. It's just very strange, that kind of, oh yes, I just my fingers skip off the keys, and it's a
magical experience.
I don't need to hear from those people.
Well, on that note, so when is 4,000 Weeks out? When can we expect to be able to get it into?
It'll be published in August. It's the end of August in the UK, beginning of August in the US, and so last week in August, I think.
Fantastic. Well, I shall look forward to reading that, and I shall look forward to continuing to receive your emails and reading your work in The Guardian. And what's the best place? It's oliverburkeman.com, I suppose, is a good starting point for anyone who wants to.
Yeah, if there's one thing I'd like people to do, it's sign up for that newsletter, because then I can reach you about other things as well. So that's Oliver Burkeman, BURKEMAN.com, and the sign up form is pretty obvious there.
Fantastic. Cool. Well, on that note, thank you very much. I really appreciate your time. And I've got too much to go away and think about now, about my own existence and why I'm such a failure and how to deal with that, and what's right in front.
No more of a failure than every human who's ever been born. That's the important.
Well, I think that's the big problem that I need to address here. So, brilliant.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
No problem. Thanks very much. There you go. I hope you enjoyed that conversation. I think we can all take a little bit of solace from that whole notion that we don't have to be striving and punishing ourselves to have a good life and to be worthy people. If you want to find out more about Oliver, you can visit his website. As we mentioned, it's www.oliverburkeman.com, and you can sign up to his excellent newsletter there as well, and check out his books. There's The Antidote, there's Help, How to Become Slightly Happier and Get a Bit More Done, and later this year 4,000 Weeks will be launched as well. If you enjoyed this podcast, there are plenty more. Wherever you get your podcasts, subscribe, give us a review, rate us, and you can also find out about my writing, my books, and more episodes of this podcast on my website at www.chrisbrock.uk. All right, there's plenty more episodes to come. Stay tuned. We've got some really good guests lined up with some other thought-provoking conversations. And in the meantime, have a lovely day.